In the winter of 1681, in the fog-thickened town of Holzweiler, nestled near the edges of the Black Forest, there lived a woman whose body had become a museum of memory and of something far more disturbing. Her name was Clara Weiss, a seamstress by trade, a widow by circumstance, and a patient if that word can be stretched to fit a patient of the heart. But her ailment was not poetic, it was pathological. It did not bloom like melancholy in verse, it rotted her from within, like a damp rose sealed in a locket. Clara had once been beautiful in the way old paintings preserve the beauty of grief, pale, hollow-eyed, the kind of face that only grows more expressive with suffering. She was 36 when her husband Joseph fell from the bell tower while repairing the village clock, his skull shattering like a brittle egg on the stones below. After his death, she refused all forms of mourning except silence. No wails, no widow's veil, no visit to the chapel. Instead, she remained in their timber-framed house, stitching dresses by lamplight, humming lullabies with no children left to receive them. For months, she did not cry, but something in her began to shift a tightness in her chest, a fever in her hands, and hallucinations that came only when the moon was full. She claimed to hear Joseph scratching from beneath the floorboards, tapping in patterns only she could decipher. Villagers whispered, of course, they always do. At first, they called it a broken heart, then madness. Then, as her skin began to pale to an almost luminous hue and her lips turned a soft, stagnant blue, they stopped calling it anything at all. One night, an apothecary from Colonel Reinhardt Baum visited the village, offering his services to the sick and superstitious alike. He was an aged man with a flask always hidden in his coat, a voice like burnt sugar, and a theory too strange for the town's priest to bless. He had studied in Prague, dabbled in Galenic humors and alchemical elixirs, and believed firmly that the body's afflictions of love were not metaphor but infestation, according to his written journals only rediscovered in 1902. During the reconstruction of his former lab, Herr Baum proposed that parasites, specifically lice, could serve as instruments of extraction. They fed not just on blood, he claimed, but on excesses of emotion, that in particular strains of women, especially those beset by grief or betrayal, the emotional residues settled into the blood like sediment in wine. To remove it, one must feed something that hungers for it. Clara was desperate enough to listen. And so began the treatment. Each morning Baum would arrive with a clay vessel, in which he kept a colony of body lice, pediculus humanus, corpus collected from orphanages, asylums, and soldiers' barracks. He insisted these were the best fed, the most sensitive to sorrow. Clara was to host them, not in cages, not on cloth, but on herself. She stripped, save for a wool underdress, and allowed Baum to apply the lice to her back, her thighs, the crook of her arms, behind her ears. At first, she shivered from shame, though not for long. Soon, she said, it felt like nothing, then something she began to crave. By the third week her skin was speckled with tiny mark spites that swelled, some festering with infection, others inexplicably oozing a blackish fluid. Yet Clara smiled. She began to hum again. Her eyes regained a glimmer, not of joy but of something sharper, purpose. Do you feel better? Baum would ask, and she would answer, they're eating what hurts. It was at this time that the priest, Father Emile, demanded to see her. What he found disturbed him. Clara sat cross-legged in the center of the parlor, surrounded by mirrors. Her body was twitching subtly, a dance of the lice feeding. She spoke to them softly, calling them by names, little Joseph, Sister Agnes, Brother Rain. She insisted they whispered back, warning her of things to come. Emile ordered an exorcism, but Clara refused. She was not possessed, she said, she was healing. The lice, she claimed, were not vermin. They were the only creatures who could love her without judgment, who drank from her willingly, who took only what she gave them. And Baum, ever the doctor, ever the watcher, wrote in his journals, she is either recovering or transforming into something I cannot classify. In the fourth week, Clara asked for more lice. When the villagers began to complain of ill and strange rashes, insomnia, visions of beetles crawling across the ceiling, it was already too late. The infestation had spread beyond Clara's body, beyond Baum's calculations. The little creatures had multiplied, and their hunger had grown. But Clara slept peacefully now. The house, they say, still stands. But the walls, if you press your ear close enough, tick softly, as if something small, something patient, still lives within. In the spring that followed, the snows melted not into water, but into rot. The village of Holzweiler found itself quieter than ever, not from peace, but from retreat. Doors remained shut. Candles flickered behind drawn curtains, not in prayer but in fear. For Clara Weiss, the silence outside was nothing compared to the symphony inside her skin. She had become host, temple, cradle. The lice now moved in rhythmic pulses, a crawling chorus beneath her flesh. But she welcomed it, even adored it. Baum continued his observations, though his hands had begun to shake. He confessed, in later pages of his writings now preserved in the archives of the Bavarian Obscura, that he feared he had created something not medicinal, but monstrous. She no longer feeds them, he wrote. They feed from her, yes, but also with her. She chooses where they go, she chooses who suffers. For Clara had stopped staying indoors. She ventured through town in long dresses with velvet seams, every stitch hiding the colonies beneath. Children she passed would begin to itch, scratch, then scream. A young boy, Lucas, collapsed in the village square, mouth open, his tongue blackened and twitching. When they tried to lift him, they found larvae beneath his collar, and yet Clara's eyes gleamed with something near divine. He lied to his mother, she murmured when questioned. And the children know. No longer did she speak of grief. Now she spoke of justice. That the lice were not just medicine but messengers, instruments of purification. They revealed what had been hidden. Shame, betrayal, bitterness. The body, she whispered to Baum one morning as she traced the lines of her ribs, remembers everything. But memory festers if it has no mouth. Mine has many now. Baum should have run, but he stayed. Not for science anymore, for fascination. There was something mythic about her, something older than medicine. She reminded him of the Furies, those ancient goddesses who fed on wrongdoings, or perhaps a new kind of saint, Saint Clara of the crawling flesh. Soon Clara began to choose people. She would sit in the market and watch. Those she stared at too long would fall ill. Those who insulted her would bleed from their gums. One man, a magistrate who once called her husband a coward, lost both eyes to a fever. So sudden it was as if the heat boiled his skull from within. Still, she never touched them. She merely watched. And then, days later, they withered. Baum began to suspect she no longer needed to apply the lice by hand. That they answered her thoughts now. That they obeyed. One night, in a fevered dream, he saw Clara standing above the town with her arms spread wide, her skin peeled like parchment, and from beneath poured thousands, millions of tiny legs, like a cloak of judgment swarming across the cobblestones. He woke soaked in sweat, and found one of the creatures in his ear. Terrified, he tried to burn his journals, but the pages would not catch. The ink had changed, thick, waxy, and dark as clotted blood. When he dipped his finger in, it smelled of iron and something else, something sweet. The town elders gathered. They spoke of curses, of biblical plagues, of witches and saints gone wrong. Father Emile, who had once tried to save Clara, now called her the bride of vermin. He urged action, but when they knocked upon her door, she opened it herself, smiling with lips cracked and raw. Her eyes were bright, and her body, radiant in a grotesque way, pulsing, alive, humming with unseen motion. She offered tea. They never drank it. Instead, they demanded she stop, that she'll repent, that she allow the lice to be removed, and burned, and buried beneath salt and ash. Clara only laughed, a low, melodic sound. You want to bury pain, she said, but it is not yours to bury. You want to cure me, but I was never the illness. I was only the host. One elder collapsed on the threshold, clutching his chest, choking on invisible wings. Baum, witnessing this, finally understood. Clara had not become the queen of the lice. She had become the hive. They did not serve her. She had dissolved into them. Her grief, her love, her hunger, all of it broken down, cell by cell, into the swarm. He fled that night. His final entry reads, "She is no longer Clara. She is memory given teeth. May God forgive me. May he remember me clean." They say that the following week the church bell rang 13 times at midnight, though no one had climbed the tower. In the morning, the bell's rope was gone. In its place, a single thread of hair, long, white, and crawling with motion. The village began to empty, but Clara remained, and so did her children. Time in Holzweiler ceased to follow its usual path, as though the calendar itself had been eroded by the passage of something unseen. Clara's house, once a simple cottage, had grown strange. The once clean, well-kept facade had become a suffocating maze of shadows, crisscrossed with thick vines that seemed to crawl, inch by inch, from the earth. The windows, once clear, were now coated in a sticky film, and behind them, the flickering candlelight would cast faint, twisted shadows that appeared to move on their own. No one dared venture near. The air around the house was stifling, as if it carried an unspoken weight, a burden of secrets too heavy to be whispered. But the whispers continued. They came from the village, from the elders who had fled, and from those few who still dared to speak of Clara, for it was now known beyond doubt that she was not simply a victim of her grief. No, she had transcended it, had made herself the vessel through which all the suffering of the village could be poured. She had become a conduit for something darker, something beyond their understanding. Her heart, broken, twisted, and remade, was no longer her own. There were tales, of course, in whispers behind closed doors. They spoke of Clara's eyes, how they no longer resembled human eyes at all. They were pale, milky, and devoid of any warmth. Her hands, once delicate and skilled in the art of needle and thread, now moved with an unnatural grace, as though they were guided by something beyond her. There were reports of people walking past her house at night, hearing soft, melodic chanting from within, a sound like the murmurs of 1,000 voices, all coming together in harmony, but with a chilling, dissonant undercurrent. It was said that Clara could no longer walk without leaving a trail behind her, a trail of dead insects, bodies that had crawled into her path only to collapse, drained of their life. She was becoming something otherworldly, a being that defied the laws of nature, and yet she did not stop. She continued her work, for the lie still fed on her sorrow, her memories, her very soul. She had become one with them. Father Emile, the priest who had once called for her exorcism, returned, but this time, he did not come with a prayer or a blessing. No, this time he came with a purpose born from desperation. He had spent years studying the texts, searching for a way to undo the curse that had befallen Clara. He had learned of an ancient ritual, one so old that it had been forgotten by most. A ritual that could, perhaps, sever the bond between Clara and the lice. A ritual that could force the memories, the grief to leave her. But to perform it, he would need Clara to be willing, and there was little hope of that. Still, Emile persisted. He knew that if he could not save Clara, he would at least save the village. He gathered the remaining townsfolk, all of whom had suffered under the strange plague that had swept through their homes. Some had lost their minds, others their children. All had suffered, one way or another. They stood at the edge of the forest, looking towards Clara's house, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Clara, however, was not the woman they once knew. She was something different now, something that could not be undone. When Emile approached the door, he was met not by the pale, sorrowful woman he had once known, but by something far more unsettling. The door creaked open on its own, revealing Clara standing in the dim light of the parlor. She was no longer clothed in the simple dress of a widow, but in something much more elaborate and intricate robe, embroidered with patterns that seemed to shift and change when you looked at them. Her hair, once dark and neatly combed, now flowed like a river of silver, and her skin, pale, translucent, was covered in a fine layer of crawling insects, wriggling under her flesh as though they were part of her, part of who she had become. "Father," Clara spoke, her voice soft, almost musical. "You've come at last." Father Emile, his heart hammering in his chest, stepped forward. "Clara," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What have you done?" She smiled, a smile that was both beautiful and terrifying. "I have done nothing. It is the lice. They are the ones who have done all this. They have taken me, Father, and in return they will give me peace." He stepped back, horrified. "This isn't peace, Clara. It's madness. You must stop. The curse must be broken." Clara's eyes, now glowing faintly in the dim light, fixed on him. "The curse," she repeated, as if tasting the word. "You still think this is a curse? But Father, don't you see? This is the truth. The world is full of suffering. People carry their pain, their shame, their guilt, inside them, buried deep. And the lice take it away. They are the ones who cleanse. They are the ones who heal." Father Emile could not find the words to respond. For a moment he simply stood there, staring at her, at the woman who had once been human. And then, the swarm moved. It was not a sight that could be easily described. The lice, millions of them, seemed to rise from her body as if summoned by some unseen force. They filled the room, filling the air with a low, buzzing hum. Father Emile stumbled backward, horrified, as the creatures crawled over the floor, over the walls, their tiny legs scrabbling for purchase. The room seemed to shrink, and he could feel the weight of the swarm pressing down on him. "Join us, Father," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the swarm. "Join us in the feast." But Father Emile did not join her. Instead, he fled, running as fast as his legs could carry him. And behind him, the house of Clara Weiss fell into silence once more. The village, what remained of it, abandoned Holzweiler shortly thereafter. The houses were left to rot, the streets were reclaimed by nature, and Clara, if she still lived, remained a spectre, a memory too terrible to be forgotten. Some say that the lice still crawl beneath the ruins, that they still hunger for the sorrow of those who pass, but no one dares go near, and those who do, they never return. Many years passed, decades folded like wilted pages, and the story of Clara Weiss faded into that place where nightmares slumber with one eye open. Holzweiler was wiped from most maps by the turn of the 18th century, swallowed by the encroaching forest and renamed in whispers only the village of Hollowskin. Travelers avoided it, priests refused to bless it, and time, so often merciful in its erasure, refused to touch it. The house remained, the air around it held still, as though even the wind feared what dwelled within. But stories, like wounds, fester when left alone. In the spring of 1732, a young scholar from Strasbourg named Lucas Minor stumbled upon the tale of Clara Weiss in the disjointed journals of Herbaum, now bound in cracked leather and tucked deep within the forbidden section of a forgotten monastery. He was not a man of superstition. He believed in ink, in reason, in proof. And so, when he read the words, "She is no longer Clara, she is memory given teeth," he did not feel fear. He felt purpose. Lucas was 29, pale, asthmatic, and brilliant. He had devoted his life to the study of collective grief, fascinated by the idea that communities could pass down sorrow like an heirloom. Clara's story, so outrageous in its grotesque beauty, seemed to him a perfect metaphor. He told no one of his plan, packed a satchel with paper, charcoal, and laudanum, and ventured toward the place where the forest swallowed names. The journey was uneventful until it wasn't. The trees thickened unnaturally as he approached the coordinates matched to Bohm's entries. Light behaved strangely, here bending, resisting. Lucas swore he heard faint scratching each time he stopped to catch his breath. but dismissed it as squirrels or his own ragged thoughts. And then he saw it. The house was still standing, cloaked in ivy and shadow, its frame gnarled like arthritic fingers clinging to earth. Time had not decayed it. It had changed it, grown it inward, made it a kind of living wound. The air around it was dense, saturated with something not quite smell, not quite silence. Lucas entered. Inside, the floorboards moaned, but not from weight from memory. Dust lay in thick, unmoving blankets, and in the corners he saw them. Small nests, perfect, round, and quivering. The first he mistook for mold. The second, he realized, was breathing. Still, he did not run. He moved room to room, sketching symbols carved into the walls, Frill's eyes, and what looked disturbingly like feeding diagrams. In the back parlor, he found a single mirror, intact but dulled, and upon it, etched with fingernails or worse, were the words, "Grief is a banquet. Sit and feast." Lucas sat. He wrote. Hours passed unnoticed. Something in the air made him forget thirst, forget fear. He began to feel as though he was not alone, not watched, shared. It began with a twitch on his ankle, then another near his neck. He reached up and his fingers brushed, not skin but legs, tiny, insistent. He stood, frantic, brushing himself wildly, but there was no end. From his cuffs, from his collar, from inside his shirt, they came, as if cold, as if they had waited for recognition. He stumbled into the hallway, collapsing before the fireplace, and there he saw her. Not flesh, not ghost. A figure, seated, veiled in black gauze that shimmered like wings. Skin pale and papery, almost translucent, yet moving, rippling with the crawl of thousands beneath it. Clara, or what remained. Her face was thin, lips stretched in neither smile nor frown, eyes open yet entirely black, like to open wounds to something ancient. She did not blink, she did not breathe. But she remembered him. Not Lucas, but Joseph, her Joseph. She rose slowly, joints creaking like old wood. Her mouth moved, no sound emerged. But inside Lucas's head, a voice, not his own, not hers. A collective murmur, a hive's prayer. He has returned. To feed, to remember. Lucas tried to scream, but his throat was full, not with fear, not with words, with movement. They had entered him, through pores, through ears, through all the hidden gates of the body sorrow keeps shut. And in those moments, seconds, hours, years, he saw everything. He saw Clara as a girl, biting her lip bloody beneath her mother's belt. He saw Joseph drunk, cold, apologizing too late. He saw the fall, the blood, the endless silence that followed. And then he saw her joy. The first time the lice fed, the quiet that followed. How it quieted the screaming inside her. Lucas understood. Not madness, not curse. Communion. The body remembers what it must. The lice, they simply archive. When he awoke, days later, he was alone. The house was empty. His satchel was gone. But in his hand, pressed deep into the flesh, was a small egg. Oval, translucent, pulsing faintly with light. He returned to Strasbourg. Changed. He did not publish his findings. He did not speak of hope. But in the years that followed, those who knew Lucas noted he was never seen without gloves, that he spoke in whispers, that his eyes had grown pale, too pale, and that students who spent time alone with him often emerged, silent. Upon his death in 1766, his journals were burned, all except one fragment, found beneath his floorboard. It read, "She was not devoured, she was received, and now I too, remember." And they feed. To this day, no one walks the forest path past Holzweiler's bones. But sometimes, when wind brushes the leaves just right, you might hear it, the faintest tick-tick-tick, like the sound of legs across parchment, of grief scratching to be known. Some say Clara is still there, not alive, not dead, only remembering.